You are standing in a field. There are people on the other side of it who want to kill you. You know this because they have been killing people from your village for 3 generations. Your grandfather died in a field like this one. Your father survived one but lost 2 brothers in another. And now it is your turn, and the only question that matters is whether the people standing across from you are more afraid than you are. This is how most people imagine ancient conflict: tribal, constant, inevitable. 2 groups of primitive humans who happen to live near each other, perpetually at war over territory, resources, and pride, a brutal baseline state that civilization slowly and painfully improved upon. The archaeological evidence says something that will genuinely surprise you. For the vast majority of human evolutionary history, organized warfare between groups was extraordinarily rare, not just uncommon, archaeologically nearly invisible. The evidence for systematic interpersonal violence in the human fossil record before a specific historical threshold is so thin that researchers have spent decades arguing about whether it existed at all in any meaningful form. And the threshold that changes everything is not the invention of weapons. It is not the discovery of fire. It is not even the emergence of language or complex social organization. It is farming. Before we get there, let's establish what the actual evidence shows. Lawrence Keeley is an archaeologist at the University of Illinois who published a landmark book in 1996 called War Before Civilization that argued prehistoric violence was widespread and systematic. His work is serious, well-researched, and important. But subsequent analysis has complicated his conclusions significantly. Keeley's primary evidence came from a relatively small number of archaeological sites showing evidence of trauma and violence, and critics including anthropologist Brian Ferguson at Rutgers University spent years demonstrating that many of those sites date to the period after the agricultural transition, not before it. When researchers specifically isolate evidence from confirmed pre-agricultural hunter-gatherer populations, the picture changes dramatically. A 2013 study published in Science by Douglas Fry and Patrick Soderberg examined 21 mobile forager band societies drawn from the ethnographic record and found that the vast majority of lethal violence involved individual conflicts, personal disputes, revenge killings between specific individuals, rather than organized group-against-group warfare. Out of 148 documented lethal events, only 55 involved more than one attacker, and only a fraction of those involved anything resembling organized intergroup conflict. This is not pacifism. People died. But it is a fundamentally different phenomenon from warfare. The same way a bar fight and a military invasion are both violence but are not the same thing. The reason for this is structural rather than moral. Hunter-gatherer bands typically consisted of 20 to 50 people in a core group with fluid membership and extensive social networks connecting them to hundreds of others across a wider territory. These networks were survival infrastructure. The neighboring group were not enemies by default. They were potential marriage partners, trading partners, emergency food-sharing allies. The group you would travel to if your fire went out or your hunting season failed catastrophically. Going to war with them wasn't just morally complicated, it was strategically catastrophic. You were destroying your own backup system. Beyond that, mobile hunter-gatherers had almost nothing worth fighting a war over. No stored food, no fixed territory in any legally defensible sense, no accumulated wealth, no permanent structures. If a conflict between groups escalated beyond what negotiation and avoidance could resolve, the most rational response was simply to move. The landscape was large, people were few. Walking away from a conflict cost almost nothing and potentially saved everyone involved. The option to simply leave was always available and frequently taken, and then everything changed. The Neolithic transition, the shift from hunting and gathering to settled agriculture, began in the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East roughly 12,000 years ago and spread across the world over the following millennia. And in the archaeological record, this transition is followed almost immediately by a dramatic and unmistakable explosion in evidence for organized interpersonal violence. The site of Crow Creek in South Dakota, dating to approximately 1325 AD, provides one of the most documented examples. Archaeologists excavating the site found a mass grave containing the remains of at least 486 individuals, roughly 60% of the estimated local population at the time. The skeletal remains showed evidence of systematic scalping, decapitation, and mutilation. This was not a natural disaster. This was organized mass killing at a scale that has no equivalent in confirmed pre-agricultural archaeological sites anywhere in the world. The pattern repeats across continents and centuries. The moment a human population transitions from mobile foraging to settled agriculture, evidence for organized intergroup violence increases sharply in the archaeological record. Fortified settlements appear, weapons specifically designed for killing humans rather than hunting animals appear. Mass graves appear. Skeletal trauma rates rise. The timing is too consistent across too many independent populations to be coincidental. The reason comes down to exactly what you would expect once you see it clearly. Agriculture creates three things that hunter-gatherer life almost never produces: stored surplus, fixed territory, and hierarchy, and each of these three things independently creates conditions for organized violence in ways that compound each other catastrophically. Stored surplus means there is now something worth stealing. A granary full of food represents months of labor and the difference between survival and starvation. It is worth fighting to take and worth dying to defend. Mobile hunter-gatherers carrying everything they own on their backs have no equivalent. You cannot raid a group that has nothing to raid. Fixed territory means you cannot simply walk away from a conflict anymore. Your fields are here, your irrigation is here, your stored food is here, your ancestors are buried here. Leaving means losing everything. The option that resolved most hunter-gatherer conflicts peacefully is suddenly off the table. And hierarchy means that for the first time in human history, some individuals have significantly more to gain from war than others. A chief or a king who wins a war gains territory, tribute, slaves, and political power. The ordinary farmer who fights the war gains almost nothing and risks losing everything. But the chief decides whether the war happens. This misalignment between who benefits from war and who pays its costs is one of the most persistent structural problems in human political organization, and it begins almost exactly when agriculture begins. Stephen LeBlanc, an archaeologist at Harvard's Peabody Museum, has documented this pattern across dozens of independent archaeological sequences and reached a conclusion that is both simple and uncomfortable. Warfare as a systematic institution is not a feature of human nature. It is a feature of a specific type of human social organization that emerged roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago and has been escalating in scale and lethality ever since. Your grandfather did not fight in a field because humans are inherently violent. He fought in a field because his civilization had been running an agricultural operating system for thousands of years, and that system generates the conditions for organized violence as reliably as it generates the conditions for cities, writing, and everything else we call history. The ancient humans who lived before that system was invented were not peaceful because they were noble or innocent or spiritually superior. They were peaceful because the structural conditions that make war rational simply did not exist yet. We built those conditions ourselves, and we have been very good at improving them ever since.